Hey guys, Ivy here again, and I went ahead and made this PowerPoint before I was sure that I was just going to do a video on attachment. I'm going to upload this as well just so people have access to it, and just in case someone's got a different kind of learning style where seeing slides and listening might be easier or better for some reason. So it's going to be the same video that I already did. I'm going to cover the same stuff, but just in a different format. So attachment theory is one of my favorite theories, and mostly because it's simple to understand and I think intuitive for most of us. Once people have an idea of how attachment works, they can sort of plug it into their own experience of being a human, and usually it just resonates for people. And let's get started. Okay, so here you are. Attachment starts with you, a happy little person. Okay, and the first thing that we do is we go out into the world and explore. We have an innate drive to do this. It happens from the moment we're birthed into the world until the day we die. We just are constant explorers of our environments. When we are little, these exploration activities are scaffolded and age appropriate. And so what that means is when we're little babies, we first begin exploring our environment and other people by making eye contact, maybe putting objects in our mouth, having that sensory tactile experience. And as we get older, the way that we explore changes and usually increases in complexity. And the scaffolded and age appropriate concept is sort of the understanding that if you have a little baby, you don't want to put them down into the middle of a busy intersection on a busy street and expect them to just know how to cross the road. But you might have a toddler that holds your hand as you walk across a crosswalk and eventually walks side by side, parallel to you, crossing the crosswalk. And then eventually, as they get older, and they age, it's more developmentally appropriate for them to walk across the street on their own. Okay, when we have scaffolded experiences, we naturally learn about limits and boundaries. We naturally know, oh, this experience is maybe too big for me to handle right now, or yeah, I think I can handle this experience, let's go. When exploration works well and our parents encourage it in really healthy ways, this is where we develop the feelings, I'm good enough. It's also where the sense of competency, confidence, our capabilities are developed. And through that sense of competency of being in the world, we develop the view that the world is safe. Okay, inevitably, as we're out exploring the world, here's my bike, my much better graphic than my hand-drawn bike. Sometimes bad things happen, even when we are really competent and we're really age-appropriate, doing things that make sense for us to do. I always have my little rock, so this guy is going to drive his bike over this rock, and he's going to have an experience of distress. So when we have experiences of distress, the next attachment goal that humans have is to get help. And so here we are, a little stick figure with our bigger stick figure. When we're little, the people we get help from tend to be big people. Obviously, as we age and grow, we use all different kinds of social relationships to help us get help. And then I think it's really important to break down what getting help means. So let's talk about that. It's basically care and support. And so we're talking about soothing, validation, reassurance, emotional organization. So soothing might be getting a hug or having your back rubbed. Validation is when you tell someone a reflection of the thing that happened to them that makes them feel like that could happen to any human being. So man, you were riding your bike, you hit that rock in the road, and you flipped over your handlebars, and that was distressing. Oh my gosh, of course it was. Reassurance is more like, yeah, oh my gosh, you hit that rock while you were riding your bike, flipped over your handlebars. You know what? you're a really good bike rider. And I'm kind of surprised that happened to you. Sometimes that just happens. And I am guessing before you know it, you're going to be out being an awesome bike rider before you even can think twice about it. Emotional organization is the form of support that involves telling the whole story of what happened. So integrating thoughts, feelings, possibly your beliefs, possibly your felt sensations of what happened into one narrative. So, oh man, it was a beautiful day. You were riding your bike. You hit this rock in the road. And I mean, it probably just felt like it came out of nowhere. And all of a sudden you were flipping off your bike. And man, I can remember times that happened to me. It was so embarrassing. Gosh, you're like a really good bike rider though. So man, I hope you feel better soon, and maybe a couple pats on the back. And gosh, yeah, I mean, sometimes bad things just happen. So that's emotional organization. Okay, so when the bottom of the wheel is going really well and we have caregivers who are great at giving us care and support, that's where we develop the core belief that we are lovable or likable. Could just be that we feel like we're worthy or deserving of care. And then implicitly, we develop the understanding that people are safe. Okay, so when this works well, the top of the wheel and the bottom of the wheel, we have this experience of feeling safe and regulated. Sometimes we talk about that as sort of being in the flow. It's kind of an important place to get to, because when people are here and both parts of these wheel is working well, we are sort of unstoppable. Okay, and that is sort of the definition of secure attachments. You can regulate through difficult experiences, you're capable of going out into the world and exploring, and you're also capable of getting help, and help is there when you need it. Obviously, things go wrong on this circle, so we're going to talk about that, because then we are sort of in the place of talking about different sorts of attachment preferences and attachment styles. So let's say that the bottom of the circle is just not there for you as a kid, and sometimes this could be because, well, abuse and neglect. I think that's the most common one that we often refer to. You just had a parent that wasn't parenting. Also, other things can cause the bottom of the wheel to kind of go offline. Those things would be addictions issue, if you have a parent who struggles with an addiction. If you have a parent who's a single parent and is working 2 jobs and just isn't home. And then I think the other thing that's worthy of putting into this category is you have a parent with medical issues and they're maybe just in and out of the home a lot, and there's just not a lot of stability. So problems that come up, oh, here we go, abuse or neglect. Oh, I wrote them down, good for me. Okay, caregiver works 2 jobs, sick or away. Yeah, caregiver is distracted. Okay, right. So this goes for parents who are on screens or cell phones all the time, right? You're missing cues from your kids that they might be distressed, and that will impact the way that they grow and develop. Okay, so what happens when that bottom part of the wheel is just not there is people go on the top of the circle, they're okay out in the world exploring, they have these moments of distress, but instead of going down to the bottom of the circle, they just stay at the top of the circle, and they actually just go back and forth up there and kind of hover anxiously. I often hear the messages, I need to get it together, or you should be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps when someone's sort of stuck on the top of the wheel here, or I have to do it on my own. This causes that hyper arousal feeling, anxious, overwhelmed, irritable, angry. And it's because we had these moments of distress, and instead of getting that soothing we need to regulate again, we pop back up into exploration mode. And so in our nervous systems, we're staying in that kind of low grade fight or flight experience. And that looks a lot like anxiety. So sometimes I have people come in and they tell me they're anxious, they're not really sure why they're anxious, and it gives me a clue that they might sometimes get stuck on the top of the wheel. Okay, right, that's where anxiety lives. Okay, so here we are, that's the regular functioning wheel. And then I want to talk about what happens when we have caregivers who don't feel safe with us exploring. The classic example of this is helicopter parents. And it's interesting because I think, again, this isn't like conscious. We're not parenting our kids from a conscious perspective when we're wanting to keep them down on the bottom of the wheel with us. But it's often a result of parents who themselves feel like the world isn't safe. And so they never really learned how to navigate it. They're not quite sure if they're capable or competent. They're not quite sure if their kids are capable or competent. And so what happens is they just want their kids to stay down on the bottom of the wheel with them. And then I think the messaging is just stay down here. I'll take care of you. I'll keep you safe. Nothing bad will happen to you if you just stay down here on the bottom of the wheel with me. And so over time, oh, that's funny. Okay. Yeah, I covered that. Okay, so over time, this causes sort of a state of hypo arousal. And if any of you have ever heard of the window of tolerance, this would be kind of dropping down into the bottom of your window. In the world of polyvagal theory, this would be you're down in this conservation immobilized mode. And this is again where depression tends to live. Dysthymia. Okay, so for people who have preferences, it being at the top of the circle, and those kind of govern their relationships, they're often thought of to have anxious, ambivalent attachment preferences. And it's an interesting situation because what is going on is they're having moments of distress and they want to go down to the bottom of the circle, but they're just not sure if they can trust people. They're just not sure if they're going to get the help that they need. It's kind of scary down there. They're not really familiar with it. So they want to connect, but they're just not fully sure that they can. So one of the messages would be, I want you to love me, but I need to make sure I'm safe. So I want to control when, how, and where you love me. I hate you, but don't leave me. It's a sort of like classic push-pull dynamic where people who prefer to be on the top of the wheel, they want the relationships, they want the closeness, they want the soothing and support. They're just ambivalent and anxious about whether or not they're going to fully get that. And so it becomes a situation where they're like eliciting care, but maybe in all these like sideways ways, or they're demanding specific kind of care without just being open to trusting that the people that they're in relationships with can care for them. On the other side of the wheel, we have avoidant attachment preferences. And so people who prefer the safety of being down here on the bottom of the wheel kind of get labeled with this avoidant attachment preference. And it's, again, because they haven't had a lot of experience feeling capable and competent and good enough exploring things like relationships. And so some of the messages would be, I want to be engaged in this relationship, but I'm not sure if I'm good enough. I'm not sure if I can trust myself to handle this relationship. So you'll notice as I go through these, they're all about sometimes being afraid of failing at something and not being sure if you're going to be good enough to do it. And so what happens is instead of moving forward and kind of launching into that exploration mode, they hang back a little bit and sort of hope for the best. Okay, again, so here we are. We all have preferences towards the top or the bottom of the wheel, and most of us have a pretty good idea of where those preferences are. Just because you have preferences on one side of the wheel or the other does not necessarily mean you have avoidant attachment disorder or you have anxious ambivalent attachment disorder. I don't really believe in those labels. I think it's just a way of characterizing patterns that humans have in relationships and patterns that they have with their relationship to the world. One really interesting phenomenon or pattern that happens in attachment is that if we have preferences towards one side of the wheel, our partners tend to have the opposite preference. And usually when there's good communication, it works out pretty well because the top of the wheel person sort of needs extra bottom of the wheel stuff and the bottom of the wheel person sort of needs extra top of the wheel stuff. Also, it causes a lot of conflict for people when they don't understand that this is happening, because they just assume that their partner doesn't understand it, or they can't see that they're on two different sides of the same wheel. And so lots of conflicts arise over who's going to do what and when, and it can cause what's called the demand withdrawal cycle, which we'll talk about at some point in the future. I also think that's a really helpful thing to know about attachment and relationships. Also, parenting tends to flip-flop generation. So if you had a caregiver who is really strong on the bottom of the circle, you tend to parent more, your preferences for parenting tend to be on the top of the circle and bottom, and vice versa. Okay, and then I want to talk about developmental trauma and complex trauma, because this really is its own subset of trauma. Yes, bad things happen. Yes, we still have this distress with developmental trauma. But what becomes really confusing is that the people who are supposed to help us down here on the bottom of the wheel are the same people who are causing us distress. And so kids get really disorganized about what they're supposed to do, who they're supposed to go to. They know they're supposed to explore and be in the world, but it all feels overwhelming all the time. Getting help's not really an option, and really can lead to people feeling pretty incoherent and disorganized. So ends up we feel unsafe in the world and unsafe with others, and that is a really uncomfortable place for people to be. Kind of a bummer. Okay, so some statistics. I don't think I talked about this in my other video. 60% of the population has secure attachment. In the world of circle security, I think one thing that's interesting about how they record and research this data, because in the world of circle security, if you are a caregiver who gets this wheel right 30% of the time, and can be attuned enough with your kid where the other 70% of the time you know you didn't get it right, and you can acknowledge that with your kid, that still creates secure attachment. So you can really actually statistically mess up a lot with parenting, and I'm not advising that, but you can mess up a lot with parenting. And if you recognize that you're messing up and you try and repair that, whatever rupture happened, you're still creating secure attachment in your kids. The other two groups are about 20/20, anxious ambivalent and anxious avoidant. And there's another category that's called disorganized attachment. It's in less than 1% of the population. I think I've experienced that here or there with a couple of people, but it really is pretty unusual and pretty rare. There it is.